What's good? It's Woog. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you were into the fight talk. I'm going to start by thanking everybody who made it out to my first live stream the other night. That was a lot of fun. I look to do at least one of those per week so we could keep it going with, looking forward at future fights and reviewing past fights, talking hypothetical fights, talking boxing history, promotional or boxing business issues, we'll call them. Yeah, and anything is on the table, including, UFC, MMA talk as well. So once again, thank you for coming out to that, we'll call it the inaugural What's Good Woog live stream. I look forward to talking with you guys more and more in the near future. Let's get into this featured fight between Jermell Charlo, 34 wins, 1 loss, and 1 draw, who is defending his WBA, WBC, and IBF belts, versus Brian Castano, 17 wins, 0 losses, and 2 draws. And Brian Castano will be defending his WBO light middleweight or junior middleweight title. So this is the rematch between Charlo and Castano, which is a battle for undisputed champion at 154. The first fight between the two was ruled we'll call it a controversial draw. Like, I think that it could have been a draw. I personally had it 1 round going towards Brian Castano. I had Castano edging the fight, even though Jermell Charlo finished the fight strong in the last 3 rounds. I had Castano edging it. You could kind of, rationalize the draw because there were a few of those rounds that were truly swing rounds. The problem was the one judge that had it heavily in Jermell Charlo's favor. That is the wonky scorecard that seems to appear in more and more of these signature fights. It was a terrible scorecard. And so even if the result itself wasn't a robbery, that was definitely a robbing scorecard. Similar to somebody having Katie Taylor beating Serrano 7 rounds to 3. You could say Taylor won the fight. You could say it was a draw, or you could edge it towards Serrano. But sometimes, like, one terrible scorecard feels like it ruins the whole batch. And I think that that was the case in Charlo versus Castano. Again, a draw wasn't the worst call here. Again, I had a Castano, but it was that one scorecard that kind of taints the entire judging of the fight. But yeah, let's get into this matchup between the two. And in the first fight, it was interesting because there were a lot of, it wasn't even an ebbs and flows type of fight. This one appeared to be what you are scoring more favorably between Jermell Charlo's constant jab, but little other power punching. He was very jab and movement heavy, which Jermell Charlo in this second stage of his career has really become, where he's a selective, electrifying power puncher. Again, very jab heavy, very good defense, but where you often have a lot of fighters who are truly exceptional round winners. In fact, his older brother, or older by a few minutes, couple hours, Jermell Charlo, who fights now 1 division up at 160, who also had a belt at 154 prior to that. But Jermell Charlo, I would argue, is the better round winner between the two Charlos. Devin Haney, Shakur Stevenson, those are Vasily Lomachenko. You have people who are just very adept in owning the rounds, where sometimes it's tough to find a round that goes the other way. I feel like with Jermell Charlo, it's become a little bit more feast or famine. Not to the degree of, say, Deontay Wilder, where he's either losing the round or knocking the opponent out, or at least, in that final few, fights for Wilder, where it was, either Luis Ortiz or Tyson Fury, where he's either scoring a knockdown or probably losing the round. Jermell Charlo isn't that power punch reliant, but I feel like we've seen a pattern develop, and this goes back to his fight against John Jackson in 2016, where John Jackson was the one who was kind of out-slicking and out-boxing Jermell Charlo, and then Jermell Charlo caught him. John Jackson Jr. kind of turned around, turned his back on Charlo, and then Charlo kind of reached around with a hook and then knocked John Jackson Jr. out cold against the ropes, where he's leaning over the ropes by the end of the fight. But prior to that knockout, John Jackson was outboxing Jermell Charlo. Before that, Jermell Charlo was cleanly outboxing, Gabriel Rosado and Vanes Martirosyan in close fights. But I felt like in that stage of Jermell Charlo's career, he was probably a better round winner in that particular style, whereas again, he's become more knockout or power punch reliant, where he's moving back, taking a step back, keeping his hand up, so he's blocking a lot of your punches and power punches, but he's looking to land his big shots in the moments that present itself. The problem with fighting a guy like Brian Castano is that he just doesn't afford you the luxury of being able to drop rounds, because if you are not voluminous in your punch output, chances are Brian Castano is going to win that round, because he is very good at cutting the ring off and then trapping you and then launching a two-fisted attack. But yeah, we've kind of seen this pattern with Jermell Charlo. It wasn't so much the case when he fought, Charles Hadley. He knocked him out in the 6th round, was more or less winning the fight up until that point. And then against Erickson Lubin, who we just saw fight that barn burner, brutal fight against Sebastian Fundora, who eventually stopped Erickson Lubin. Just too much damage incoming for Lubin. Some people think that Lubin fought the wrong style fight against Fundora, but that's a tricky one. You're gonna have to figure out how to fight a 6'5", 6'6", 154-pounder who likes to fight in the phone booth, who has a very durable chin apparently. But yeah, when Jermell Charlo fought the previously undefeated Erickson Lubin, he knocked him clean out in the first round, where Erickson Lubin basically dipped the wrong way. A lot of people were wondering whether this was too much too soon in the very promising prospect turned contender Erickson Lubin, who was a pretty hot prospect and who was showing a very mature game for being at such a young age, mixing up the attack to the body, keeping a pretty high construct, being a patient hunter. And when he fought Jermell Charlo, he again just dipped into the wrong punch, and Jermell Charlo threw kind of like a hook. It was a hook mixed with like an uppercut, but he didn't turn it up. He just placed it low with the right hand. And again, the Erickson Lubin just dipped right into it, knocked him cold out. Well, not cold out, but it was one of those where your body stiffens, and his arm was like straight, and straight behind him, where it took him 4 or 5 seconds to really get his physical wits about him to even attempt a get up. But by then it was too little too late. And again, sensational first round knockout for Jermell Charlo's resume. I think that might have been his most sensational win to date. And then he fights a good competitive fight with Austin Trout, where, Austin Trout was giving everybody around this period of his career a run for his money, from Canelo Alvarez to Jermell Charlo, and then before that, Austin Trout had beaten Miguel Cotto when Miguel Cotto first started flirting at 154. But Austin Trout has, kind of turned into like a B+, A- level guy, where if you are truly the cream of the crop, you should be able to edge him out on the scorecards, which Jermell Charlo did. He beat Austin Trout via majority decision. And then he fights that first fight with Tony Harrison, where this was the night where Jermell Charlo fought Matt Korobov, where Matt Korobov was giving Jermell Charlo all kinds of problems, with that straight left hand, and then Jermell Charlo turned the tide. Well, Jermell Charlo on that same card fought Tony Harrison, and I actually thought that Jermell Charlo, although he was clearly having some issues with Harrison's boxing style, sweet science, just a very smart, technical, crafty fighter who was also kind of exploiting Jermell Charlo's lack of consistent output. Well, I thought that Jermell Charlo did enough to edge the win over Tony Harrison, but the judges actually gave this one to Tony Harrison via unanimous decision, marking the first loss of Jermell Charlo's career. And then he fights Jorge Cota, kind of a comeback fight, knocks him out in the 3rd round, where, again, if you're not elite caliber, Jermell Charlo is probably going to spark you with one of his electrifying power punches. And he could do it with either hand. He has truly blessed punching power, and Jorge Cota was on the receiving end of that. And then Jermell Charlo fights the rematch with Tony Harrison, where, this is one of the things that concerns me about Jermell Charlo's chances in this rematch against Brian Castano, and it's that when you fight somebody 12 rounds the first time, you would think that you go back to the drawing board, with Derek James and company, and you start kind of game planning for what you were having issues with in the first fight to try to rectify that in the second fight. And although Jermell Charlo did end up knocking Tony Harrison out in the 11th round, basically because of a defensive lapse. It was a terrible mistake by Tony Harrison. He started dropping his hands and just being a little bit more careless or reckless in a way where you're giving Jermell Charlo like the only chance he has to win the fight, to catch you with something big. And yeah, Tony Harrison, I'm sure, is kicking himself because of the way that he lost this knockout loss against Jermell Charlo. Because leading up to that knockout, this was a case of, damn, even in this rematch, round after round after round, you can't help but think, damn, Jermell Charlo is giving these away too. And so whatever corrections he needed to make against Tony Harrison, again, through 6 rounds, through 8 rounds, it was Tony Harrison on the unofficial scorecards and on most of the judges' scorecards who was winning majority of the round or majority of the rounds. And it required at least a knockdown from Jermell Charlo to win the fight. Well, he got that via stoppage in the 11th round. But, you know, this just speaks more to Jermell Charlo not being that quintessential round-winning type of fighter. He just hasn't proven to be that. And even in his next fight against Jason Rosario, who was coming off that big win against Julian J. Rock Williams, where Jason Rosario had won the WBA and IBF belts. And so at this time, going into the fight with Rosario, Jermell Charlo only had the WBC belt, and then he wins the WBA and IBF belts off of Jason Rosario, who was also winning a few of those rounds. Now, granted, you're always going to lose a round or 2, maybe 3, you know, in any fight that you're in most cases, especially against a high caliber fighter like Jason Rosario, who also gave Erickson Lubin a pretty good run for his money before getting knocked out. But the way that, you know, Jason Rosario, with his two-fisted attack, he likes to jab and set up his hard right hand and then follow that up with a mean left hook. Very 1-2-3 type of fighter. And he looks to throw those power punches early and often. Jason Rosario is going for the kill. And so he was backing Jermell Charlo up in a lot of these cases, in a lot of these rounds. But Jermell Charlo turned the tide in the 6th and 7th round, and he dropped Jason Rosario in, I believe, the 6th or 7th round, and then ended up finishing him in the 8th round with a off-time jab to the body. He threw like kind of a double jab to the body, and it was really weird. Jason Rosario went down from that jab to the belly, and he was just all out of sorts. He looked like he was unable to breathe for like a period of time, to where it looked kind of scary. Rewatch that knockout of Jason Rosario at the hands of Jermell Charlo. Very unusual. But yeah, Jermell Charlo, again, saves the day with his power. But in that case, I would also say that it was attributed to his boxing acumen, to be able to throw the jabs with the timing that he was throwing the jabs, and even his power punches, which, again, he had rocked Jason Rosario to the side of the head, ruining Jason Rosario's equilibrium, kind of, you know, priming him for that next round knockout. So, yeah, Jermell Charlo is a good boxer, and even in the following fight, and that was the first battle for Undisputed against Brian Castano, Brian Castano was winning the rounds because he was trapping Jermell Charlo and letting that two-fisted attack go. But Jermell Charlo was winning like a minute and a half to 2 minutes of a lot of these rounds behind a jab, where it's a slower round, lower output from both fighters, because Brian Castano is looking for his opportunity to go to work once he kind of has Jermell Charlo backed up a little bit. And that's what a lot of the rounds that Brian Castano was winning, that's what was winning him the rounds. The fact that he could have a successful 45 seconds to a minute of the round that kind of outweighed Jermell Charlo's work behind a jab moments of winning the round. And, you know, to Jermell Charlo's credit, a lot of those combinations that Brian Castano was throwing, Jermell Charlo was catching some of the punches with his elbow, with his fist if it was up top, and was kind of rolling with a lot of the punches. But if you're not delivering a lot of output back, it's easy, because of the optics, for the judges to swing that round in Brian Castano's favor. There was one judge, Cheatham, who was basically who was basically giving Jermell Charlo almost all of the swing rounds, which is why I think it was Cheatham, and that's how you had that one scorecard going heavily in Jermell Charlo's favor, because a lot of the close rounds he was just giving to Jermell Charlo. But when I'm watching the fight, I'm like, yeah, I see the jab working for Jermell Charlo, but Brian Castano's coming in with this high guard. So how many of those jabs are truly getting through? And when Jermell Charlo would occasionally launch the 1-2 with the right hand behind the jab, a lot of those were getting partially blocked. it was when he was throwing that left hook. That left hook was catching Castano pretty cleanly in the moments where he was shaking Castano up. And again, Jermell Charlo finished the fight strong, where he rocked Castano multiple times. And in the second round, had Castano pretty badly buzzed with, one of those left hooks, and then kind of opened up where he looked like he was kind of going for the kill against Castano. But then by the third and fourth round, things started swinging back in Castano's favor. And then the overall output of Jermell Charlo started to reduce once again. But yeah, it becomes a question of what you are favoring between Jermell Charlo's movement and the jab versus Castano's, patient hunting, high guard, and then letting your hands go with vicious attacks with both hands when you've got the opportunity to really let go against Jermell Charlo. And, in the third round, Jermell Charlo got rocked when he was up against the ropes, got rocked twice at the hands of Brian Castano. So yeah, it was a very interesting fight. It was a pretty tough fight to score, but it's hard to swing the rounds in the sweet science work behind the jab guy's way if he's not launching enough output consistently with the power punches, because Brian Castano just looks like he's launching a more emphatic attack with both hands, and you hear the punches thudding. So again, even if you're catching the punch partially, it's easy to score it because the ferocity is coming so hot and heavy that it's not until you see an instant replay that you see, oh, maybe some of this was caught, maybe some of that was caught. So that strategy is what I think Brian Castano should re-enter this rematch in with. If you're Castano, you don't change too much. And by the way, even in the middle of the ring, Castano was occasionally landing a nice straight right hand that was leading to more of the backing up of Jermell Charlo. He wasn't throwing very many jabs at all. Maybe that's where you could change things a little bit if you're Brian Castano. Through I think 6, 7, maybe even 8 rounds, Brian Castano threw less than 10 jabs in total. Not landed, through less than 10 jabs. So maybe he could up the jab output, and maybe that'll make things easier to score in Castano's favor. But Castano, he got in this position not because he was beating most of the guys who were ranked in the top 10 or top 5 in the 154-pound division. It wasn't Castano, beating a Erickson Lubin or a Tony Harrison, or, Jarrett Hurd was one of the best fighters in the division, Julian J. Rock Williams. No, he didn't take that path to get into the title shot against then WBO 154-pound champ Patrick Teixeira. It was actually a fight against Erislandy Lara, the former multiple-time champ at 154. Brian Castano fought Erislandy Lara to a draw. So it was that fight that put Castano on the map. And it was much of the same. You had more of the patient Erislandy Lara moving around the ring, even though he doesn't move as well as he used to. But he was trying to move around the ring and exercise his, it was a southpaw in the case of Lara, sweet science, technical ability, and skill to outbox Castano, who was just pretty relentless in trying to trap Erislandy Lara and letting his two-fisted attack go. But again, he's not doing so completely recklessly. He's got the high guard up, and he's got, better than average reflexes, and the timing of his power punches, again, are making him competitive against somebody as good as Jermell Charlo. So it's timing, it's defense, it's patience, it's a lot of things that go into the recipe that make Brian Castano effective. But yeah, he was very effective in those late rounds against Erislandy Lara. It ended up being a split draw. So then he fights Wale Omotoso after that, knocks him out in the 5th round, and then he has that fight against Patrick Teixeira, the very tall for the division. Not as tall as Sebastian Fundora, but taller than the average 154-pounder, Patrick Teixeira. By the end of this fight, Patrick Teixeira was holding on to survive the fight. Brian Castano beat him via unanimous decision to capture that WBO belt that he then brought into that first fight against Jermell Charlo. So what do I expect in this rematch between Jermell Charlo and Brian Castano? Again, that rematch between Charlo and Tony Harrison has me wondering whether he's learned everything he needs to learn from that first fight against Castano to improve his chances in this rematch, just round over round. Because at the end of the day, this comes down to, unless he just knocks Brian Castano out, which is always a distinct possibility, but he needs to get better at winning the 1-minute pockets in the rounds, like minute 1, minute 2, minute 3, where you are doing more than just like, the jab that, again, it's questionable how effective that jab actually is. Like, you might think that it's effective. I think that in spots it's very effective, and I think that some of those jabs are clearly getting through. But you've got to do more than that, and keeping the defensive, the defensive stance where you're taking the step back against a guy who's looking like he's the hunter, looking to pin you and then go to work. You can't allow that same visible dynamic to play out against Castano, because I think, again, Castano is going to start racking up more of those rounds. You've got to put something else on top of the jab, like throwing the left hook more consistently and then moving, rather than just jab, block, and then move. I feel like you've got to couple the jab with something else. He was, again, throwing that 1-2 occasionally, but sometimes both of those were getting blocked. Or maybe turn the right hand around a little bit. Or maybe go to the body more emphatically and consistently. Like, he would jab to the body and he would throw the left hook to Castano's body, sometimes effectively, just not often enough for me or most people unofficially or officially judging the fight to give to Jermell Charlo. So I do think that he's going to be a little bit more consistent with his power punch output, not just the jab, but throwing more power punches. Because, again, by nature, Jermell Charlo has been very episodic in his power punching. Very effective. Again, if he splashes correctly, fight might be over. But is the leopard going to change his spots in this case, where Jermell Charlo does more to win minute by minute within the rounds, to where you can say, yeah, I would give the 2 minutes that Jermell Charlo won in this round, I would give that more weight than the 1 minute that Brian Castano started letting his hands go when he did, in fact, get Jermell Charlo pinned up against the ropes. Are we going to get that, though? I think that Brian Castano, by the 3rd and 4th round, is going to start pouring on the activity. And I think that there are going to be moments in this fight where it looks like the same narrative is starting to develop. Like, damn, is Jermell Charlo doing enough to win these rounds? How do you have it? Who's it going to be? Steve Farhood on the Showtime broadcast? How do you have it, Steve? And, I could see this being, 4 rounds to 2 or something like that in favor of Castano. But I think that Jermell Charlo is going to do enough when you get to the 8th, 9th, and 10th rounds to kind of reassert control, probably hurt Castano again, or for the first time if you didn't hurt him early. Again, I'm looking for there to potentially be a knockdown in the first 6 to 8 rounds. I mean, there are just too many moments where Castano's coming in with the two-fisted attack, and then Jermell Charlo's responding with the electrifying, power punches in return. I think that we could get a knockdown in the first half of the fight in this one. But I think that by the 8th, 9th round, Jermell Charlo is going to start reasserting control by buzzing Castano and then jabbing and moving more often, to where Castano is compromised in his relentless attacks, to where he's looking a little bit more reluctant to start diving in because of some of the punishment that I think he's going to absorb in the first half of the fight, where he's not going to be as tenacious in the 9th through 12th rounds, where I think that Jermell Charlo might open strong and finish strong like he did, more or less in the first fight. But I think he's going to do so a little bit more voluminously, where he is throwing more punches, more power punches than he was in the first fight. If he doesn't do that, then I think Brian Castano wins this one via decision. But I'm actually going to go Jermell Charlo. And I feel like I'm sort of going against the natural logic of these fighters' styles, because I feel like there are more scenarios where you can see Brian Castano edging like an 8-4, 7-5 type of victory. Whereas I think Charlo can potentially stop Castano. I don't think that he will, but I do think he's going to knock Castano down in this fight. And I think that he's going to win like 7 rounds to 5, 8 rounds to 4 over Castano, with the knockdown further establishing the decision win for Jermell Charlo on the scorecards. That's how I see Jermell Charlo versus Brian Castano playing out. But yeah, there are a lot of question marks in this one. Or actually, they're just a couple questions, but those questions are pretty important questions. And I mean, the closeness in this and the uncertainty of this is reflected in the betting odds. You've got, I mean, I think the last time I looked at it, I think I saw Jermell Charlo as like a slight minus 120 to minus 110 favorite. Rarely in these marquee boxing fights do you see like minus 120 to minus 110. So it's nearly dead even between these two. So yeah, this is about as close as it gets in major title fights. But I'm going to go Jermell Charlo, and I don't even quite know why. I don't know if it's my faith in, him and Derek James's, game planning coming in spite of the round losing versus Tony Harrison in their rematch, even though that was pretty much erased with the knockout. I should have more reason to go Castano via decision, but I'm going to go Jermell Charlo scoring a knockdown in this fight and edging it, 7 rounds to 5 or 8 rounds to 4 on the scorecards. Maybe even a close split decision style win for Jermell Charlo. I think it's going to be very competitive, but I think that Jermell Charlo is going to create more opportunities to let significant power punches go in this rematch. But yeah, let me know what you think of about Charlo versus Castano 2 in the comments. And please, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. By the way, if whoever wins this is going to fight Fundora at some point, right? Could you imagine like Jermell Charlo versus Fundora? Or damn, like Brian Castano, who's only like 5'8". Jermell Charlo is about 5'11", 6 feet. Brian Castano would be a 5'8" fighter, which is like an inch or two shorter than Erickson Lubin, fighting a 6'6" Sebastian Fundora. That'd be pretty crazy. But yeah, Fundora is almost undoubtedly going to be next up for a title shot. But yeah, let me know what you think about this one. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.